On this edition of Behind the Bills, we're discussing a proposed bill that may have been overlooked, Senate Bill 330, one that could change how your district creates its budget. So let's get started. SB 330 would reduce California's school district fiscal planning horizon from 3 years to 2 years by eliminating the requirement to project finances for the subsequent second fiscal year. Now, under current law, districts prepare multi year projections covering the current year and two subsequent years, which are used to assess fiscal solvency and a district's ability to meet ongoing financial obligations. The bill would revise the State Board of Education's fiscal standards and criteria and would force CDE to change its financial reporting systems to reflect a 2 year forecasting model beginning in 2027-28. There's a lot to unpack here, and we brought in the legend on the show, Michael Fine, the executive director of the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team, FICMAT, for all of our listeners. Michael, I just provided some of the elements of this proposal, but what am I missing that districts need to know?
Well, I think the first thing is I would separate out the idea of best practice for a district and its internal operations and board information and local public information from the certifications that the board does that a county superintendent then is checking and agreeing with that happens at twice a year at first and second interim report. So if this bill were successful, the certifications would be based on current year plus one subsequent year instead of plus two subsequent years. But that doesn't mean the district can't continue to prepare two subsequent years or three or four or five. Um, the state of California, interesting enough, prepares 5 year forecasts. And so free software that FICMAT provides to school districts called Projection Pro gives the district the choice of 3, 4, or 5 years. And so I would separate the idea of certification is based on, under this bill, 2 years versus best practice and information being based on a minimum of 3 years. So I think that's a little bit of the safeguard or the fallback. This is a bill sponsored by CTA, so I wouldn't take it for granted. They obviously have a lot of clout. I do wonder if they're confusing some issues. One of their issues in current collective bargaining that they've routinely raised is levels of reserves. That's different than third year certifications. I could name districts that they've recently bargained with and been successful from CTA's perspective at bargaining, where everybody ignored the third year impacts and they still reached a deal. It puts the district in a more difficult financial position, closer to levels of distress we don't like to see. But generally speaking, this is bad public policy. We've had 3 year window for almost 35 years. It has served districts well. It informs boards of what the horizon looks like. It's the third year is more difficult to forecast than the first year or the second year, no question about it. But there are sources of data that we all subscribe to and provide to districts that give them a standardized set of assumptions for the third year. If they want to follow those, they can obviously customize them for themselves. But School Services of California publishes a dartboard that looks farther out. The county superintendents multiple times during the year publish the common message, which looks farther out and is informed by not only us, but the Department of Finance and others. So an argument could be made that the numbers are pretty soft in the third year. But the reality is we have a lot more standardization around those numbers than we do in many other for many other data elements, to be honest with you.
And I had mentioned, that this proposed bill may have been overlooked. You and I were talking about this. This is a gut and amend. So maybe you could just talk about what that means. And then as a school financial expert, How troubling is this proposal for districts, including those that are already in financially distressed situations right now?
Well, it is a gut and amend. So this bill was on a different topic that I don't even remember, frankly, the original topic, but it wasn't one that schools and school finance related. The author gave up on that bill and gutted it and put this language in at CTA's request. And so it is scheduled for its first hearing, which would be an assembly education next week, next Wednesday, July 1st. Um, and then it'll go through the assembly process and then have to return to the Senate, to the House of Origin for concurrence, right? Given it's gotten them in. Um, how troubling. Uh, this would change, as I've already mentioned, this would change 35 years of practice that has generally led to better fiscal stability, not less. In the last 35 years, there's been 10 school districts that have gone into state receivership. There are hundreds and hundreds in those 35 years, thousands in those 35 years that have been certified as qualified or negative at some point in those 35 years that didn't get to receivership. And in part, that's because they had to look out at where they were going to be and they made the local difficult decisions to make changes in their operations and in their expenditure plans to prevent receivership. So this is an item, so we're clear. This is an item in what's called the criterion standards. Criterion standards are adopted by the state board. This piece of legislation skips over the normal process of updating the criterion standards, directs the state board simply to make this change without any advice or analysis, and gives them a deadline in which to make that change. This is not a provision that's in statute, it's in regulations. And so the legislature, if they were to enact this bill as written, would be skipping over a well-practiced process that involves a committee. CTA is included in that committee. We're included in that committee. It's a committee that CDE pulls together to every once in a while to look at criterion standards. So the bill skips over a well-established process, number one. It is bad public policy, number two. It is actually counter to our historical data that the third year gives us valuable information. It's counter that. It ignores the idea that the third year, that the data we get today and the analysis we get today on the third year is not helpful. In fact, quite the opposite. It's super helpful.
And I do want to make sure I note this that AXA is opposed to Senate Bill 330. I think all of us, Michael, can agree when budgeting, you have to look beyond 1 year or 2 years. And for school districts, that's especially important because sustainability matters. There are so many budget variables year over year, including collective bargaining and benefits and costs of goods of services. And you can't just plug in a number and just kind of be like, okay, we're good. So if you're talking to a school district CBO about this bill, what are you saying to them?
So first, I don't expect this bill to be successful. I'll just say that. I think our legislature will recognize it for what it is, and that's bad policy. But let's say that it is successful in some meaningful form as we read it today. Then my recommendation to a CBO would be to continue their practice of doing 3, 4, and 5-year forecasts. Um, it's simply that what they submit to their county and to the state in their interim reports on the form MYP, multi-year projections, will only have 2 columns on it, current year and 1 subsequent year. It doesn't mean that from a best practice standpoint, they shouldn't keep their eye on the 3rd, 4th, 5th year, whatever their practice is locally. So I would make that distinction between what your certification's based on and what data you're looking at and talking to your board and your community about. If you if in today's environment the third year would say that you're qualified or negative, and you lop the 3rd year off and now you're positive, I would be highlighting that kind of information to your board, because otherwise they have a false sense that everything in the district is okay, when in fact the cliff's getting closer. It's like our side mirrors on our cars, objects are closer than they appear, right? It's that it's that idea. You're gonna have to turn around and look for that car on your left and your right, like we were all taught in driver's ed, right, years ago, as opposed to being completely reliant on that mirror. It's that same concept. So local practice, um, continue to do the multi-year, continue to discuss it with your board and the community, your executive team. Make sure they're well aware of what's on the horizon versus what you submit on some formal document to the county.
I'm going to ask you scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being a sensible budget plan, and 1 being at the bottom. You've talked about, bad practice and sensibility and everything. From your experience, where does this land?
Am I allowed to say 0?
You can absolutely look, it's just you and me talking, right? And any of our listeners, right? If you
So
want to say
in fairness
0,
to to the scale, you gave me a 1. This is not sensible public policy. This is not sensible financial, practice. Every every good financial plan is a multi-year. Let's remember this, and this is super important where this comes from. AB 1200, which is the seminal legislation from 1991 that put all this stuff in place, including criteria and standards, while they've been adopted or revised and added to, subtracted from, and so on over the years, recognize that the basis of AB 1200 is a early warning system. It's raising the red flag on the flagpole that things aren't quite right in my district, right? How far do we raise it up? That's the positive certification, the qualified, the negative, right? Determines how far up the mast we put the flag. And so this is an essential element to early warning. Do we want short early warning where we make silly decisions suddenly, right? Because we're only looking at 2 years under this bill. Or do we want to make thoughtful decisions over a longer period of time, i.e., 3 years or 4 years, and so on, right? Um, Stop and think about just the reduction in force process. If districts were looking out 3 years and they know what they need to do today, they could take advantage of things like attrition. They could adjust hiring practices today and never have to get to a reduction in force, right? If you shorten that window of time, you're now almost assured of quick decisions that have an immediate implementation because your view is shorter, right? You are close, the car behind you or off to the side of you is closer than it appears, right? And so you will definitely jump to reduction in force. We all get reduction in force is horrible. I None of us came into this business to lay people off, right? It's a horrible process. It's completely demoralizing. The 3-year and longer window actually gives us a tool to avoid things like reduction in force.
I know that you've made mention of it. Lawmakers are going to see this for what it is. They're going to see this as bad practice. Um, what brings you hope as lawmakers dive into this, and what can school leaders do during this process?
Well, first, I suspect, as you've already indicated, access position. Management generally has that position that I'm aware of. Certainly, we do. While we don't weigh in on bills too often, we will weigh in on this bill because it directly relates to the work we do every day. Um, I think our policymakers again are smarter than sometimes we give them a lot of credit for. The first committee, led by Dr. Patel, Assembly Education Committee, is made up of a very wise leader in the chair and of members who understand these dynamics. Um, and so it will then progress from there, and we get another opportunity to discuss it in the Senate should it move forward. It does have a cost to it. The bill specifically requires that the new SACS web system be modified. That's not an easy modification. The 3 years are built throughout the logic and throughout, about 30 pages of reports. It's not just the MYP, it's also built into the criteria and standards, which are 26 pages all by themselves. FICMET's intimately familiar with that since we're the developer of the SACS web. So it will be our team of programmers at our California School Information Services group to modify this code. It will not be inexpensive to do that. Um, I don't think the state has an appetite to put money into this. Um, Saying all that, having said all that, if the bill is successful, then I'm going to go back to where we started. And my advice to CBOs and superintendents and boards would be continue locally to do your long range planning. One other piece I want to raise up. It's been in place for 35 years. LCAPs from 12, 13, right? So 13 years at this point. Don't forget that LCAP is a 3-year plan. It's not coincidence that LCAPs are a 3-year plan. They followed the multi-year projection standard, which is 3 years. And remember, you can't approve a budget locally without first approving your LCAP, and that one of the county superintendent's duties in reviewing your budget is to ensure it has the resources in it to be able to support the LCAP. So alignment of year 1, of year 2, of year 3 in your instructional plan and your plan for students in the LCAP needs to be supported by a multi-year financial plan as well. This bill doesn't change all those elements, and so we will end up with some conflicts out there in practice, right? Because we changed some statutes, we didn't change all. Also, we have statutes around collective bargaining that require disclosure and certification of affordability over the life of the agreement. Some agreements extend beyond 2 years. So we have conflict there as well.
There's a reason why we brought Michael Fine on because there's no way that we could have given you as robust an analysis of this proposed bill as we have. Michael Fine, the executive director of the Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team. Michael, thanks so much for being with us on this edition of Behind the Bills.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And Behind the Bills is produced by Michael Kelly, and you can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm Naj Alikhan. We'll see you next time on Behind the Bills.